Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that might surprise you. You've probably pictured ancient Rome as a glittering empire of marble columns, noble senators, and triumphant legions marching in perfect step. But what if Rome, the eternal city, was a bit more eternal mess? Beneath the grandeur there was grit, chaos, and a surprising amount of absurdity that made life in Rome far less glamorous than the statues suggest. So, let's wander through the crowded, smelly streets of this ancient world together, shall we? If you enjoy drifting off to tales of forgotten history, maybe give a like or subscribe, but only if you feel like it. For now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let yourself sink into the world of ancient Rome, a place where glory and grime lived side by side. You're ready to step into the past, where the air is thick with dust and ambition, and the story unfolds like a dream you can almost touch. Let's begin. You wake up in Rome, sometime around 100 CE, not in a gleaming palace, but in a rickety six-story tenement called an insula. The bed beneath you is a straw mattress, prickly, and probably hosting a few uninvited guests. Fleas mostly, though you try not to think about it. The room is small, barely 10 feet across, with a single window letting in a sliver of smoky light. Outside, the city is already awake, a cacophony of cartwheels rattling on cobblestones, vendors shouting about their questionable fish, and the distant roar of a crowd at some chariot race gone wrong. You stretch, your back creaking from the night's sleep, and notice the walls. They're thin, so thin you can hear your neighbour arguing with his wife about last week's gambling debts. The insula is a marvel of Roman engineering, not because it's grand, but because it hasn't collapsed yet. These buildings, stacked high to house Rome's million-strong population, are notorious for their shoddy construction. The poet Juvenal once quipped that Romans lived under the constant threat of their homes turning into kindling. Fires are common, so are floods, thanks to the Tiber River's moody temperament. You glance at the ceiling, wondering if today's the day it decides to cave in. You pull on a tunic, coarse wool, slightly damp from the humid air, and step out into the hallway. It's narrow, dark, and smells faintly of yesterday's cabbage stew. The stairs creak underfoot as you descend, passing a family of 6 crammed into a single room, a stray dog sniffing for scraps, and a graffiti-covered wall proclaiming someone named Lucius loves Flavia, though Flavia apparently disagrees. Downstairs, you step into the street, and Rome hits you like a wave. The streets are a labyrinth, narrow and winding, packed with people shoving past each other, merchants, slaves, senators' wives, and the occasional pig running loose. The air is thick with the scent of sweat, baking bread, and something less pleasant wafting from the open sewers. You dodge a splash of slop from a chamber pot emptied from a window above. "Watch it," you mutter, but no one cares. This is normal. Rome's sanitation system is a marvel in theory. Aqueducts bring fresh water, and the Cloaca Maxima drains the city's waste. But in practice, it's a gamble whether you'll step in something you'd rather not. You pause to buy a loaf of bread from a vendor, his hands suspiciously grimy, and he tells you it's fresh from the oven. You're not sure you believe him, but hunger wins. As you chew, you notice the bread's gritty texture, sand or dirt, likely from the millstones. Romans, it seems, have strong teeth or low standards. You're starting to see it now. Rome's grandeur is a facade, a polished marble surface hiding a city that's chaotic, cramped, and just a little bit gross. But there's a strange charm in it, isn't there? You take another bite and keep walking, ready to see what else this city has in store. You step out of your cramped insula and decide to seek out one of Rome's famed baths, those legendary havens of cleanliness and luxury you've heard so much about. The sun is climbing higher now, warming the cobblestones under your sandals, and the city hums with its usual chaotic rhythm. Vendors shouting, donkeys braying, and the faint splash of something unpleasant being tossed from a window above. You've been told the baths of Trajan are the place to go, a sprawling complex of marble and steam where Romans supposedly wash away the grime of their bustling empire. It sounds like the perfect escape from the sticky, crowded streets, so you weave through the throng, dodging a cart piled high with amphorae and a child chasing a stray chicken, heading toward the promise of serenity. The baths come into view, and they're impressive, no question. Towering arches frame the entrance, their surfaces adorned with intricate mosaics of frolicking nymphs and sea creatures, glinting in the morning light. You pause for a moment, taking in the grandeur. The structure seems to whisper of Rome's might, a testament to an empire that can bend stone and water to its will. You step inside, expecting a tranquil oasis, a place where the city's chaos melts away in clouds of steam. But the reality hits you like a damp towel. The air is thick, not just with heat but with voices, hundreds of them, overlapping in a cacophony of laughter, arguments, and the occasional shout of a vendor hawking snacks. It's less a sanctuary and more like a marketplace on a festival day, packed with bodies and noise. You make your way to the caldarium, the hot bath, hoping for a moment of peace. The room is vast, with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with polished marble, but the water itself tells a different story. It's warm, sure, steaming gently in the humid air, but it's also cloudy. You hesitate at the edge, watching as dozens of bathers, merchants, labourers, even a few toga-clad patricians, wade in without a second thought. The water swirls with a faint sheen, a mix of sweat, dirt, and who knows what else, shared by everyone who's dipped in today. You overhear a man nearby, his voice carrying over the splash of water, joking about how the baths are clean enough if you don't look too closely. You're starting to understand what he means. You ease into the water anyway, feeling the warmth seep into your bones, but it's hard to relax when you notice a stray hair floating past. The baths, you realise, are less about hygiene and more about spectacle. Romans flock here not to get clean, but to see and be seen, to gossip, to close business deals, to flirt. You spot a group of men in one corner, their voices loud as they discuss grain prices, while a woman nearby laughs with her friends, passing around a jug of what they call bath wine, a cheap, warm vintage that smells faintly of vinegar. A vendor weaves through the crowd, offering skewers of dubious meat, and you politely decline, wondering how anyone eats in a room this steamy. The scene is lively, even charming in its chaos, but it's not the pristine ritual you imagined. Cleanliness, it seems, is more of a suggestion than a guarantee. You climb out, dripping, and move to the tepidarium, the warm room, hoping for a quieter spot. The air here is cooler, but the crowd is just as thick. You sit on a stone bench, feeling the dampness of your tunic cling to your skin, and watch as a slave scrubs a wealthy man's back with a strigil, scraping off layers of oil and dirt. The process looks thorough, but you can't help noticing the slave's hands, calloused, unwashed, moving from one client to the next without so much as a rinse. You wince, thinking of the water you just left behind, shared by dozens, maybe hundreds of strangers. The poet Marshall once wrote about a bather who left the water dirtier than when he entered, and you're starting to believe him. Leaving the baths, you step back into the street, the air now feeling almost fresh compared to the humid chaos inside. You pass one of Rome's famous aqueducts, its arches stretching into the distance like the spine of some ancient beast. The aqueducts are a marvel, no doubt, channeling millions of gallons of water from distant springs to feed the city's fountains, baths, and homes. Romans boast about them endlessly, and you can see why. There's something miraculous about water flowing uphill, defying gravity through sheer engineering. But as you approach a public fountain, where a woman is filling a clay bucket, You notice the water's slight brownish tint. You lean closer, catching a faint metallic smell. The pipes that carry this water, you've heard, are made of lead, a material Rome loves for its durability and ease of shaping. No one knows it yet, but those pipes are leaching something sinister into the water, a slow poison that creeps into the city's veins. You think of the headaches you've noticed among your neighbours, the strange lethargy that sometimes grips the insula's residents. The aqueducts are a triumph, but they come with a hidden cost, one that Rome won't understand for centuries. You decide to take a sip from your own flask, filled yesterday from a well outside the city. It's stale, but at least it's free of that metallic tang. As you walk, you pass a public latrine, another of Rome's supposed triumphs in sanitation. You peek inside, curious. The room is lined with stone benches, each with neatly carved holes, and a small channel of water runs below, carrying waste toward the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. It's impressive in theory, a communal toilet for dozens, with running water to keep things tidy. But the reality is less inspiring. The seats are worn, stained, and suspiciously damp, and the air is heavy with a smell that makes your eyes water. A man sitting nearby, tunic hiked up, chats casually with his neighbour, as if this is the most normal place for a conversation. You notice a sponge on a stick, the infamous tersorium, leaning against the wall, a shared tool for, well, you know. You decide you don't need to use the facilities after all. The streets themselves are no cleaner. You step carefully, avoiding the open gutters that line the roads, carrying a mix of rainwater, kitchen slop, and worse. The Cloaca Maxima may be a feat of engineering, but it can't keep up with a city of 1 million people, all producing waste with no regard for where it ends up. You dodge a splash from a chamber pot emptied from a window above, a common enough occurrence that Romans barely flinch. The poet Juvenal once complained about the dangers of walking under windows, and you're starting to see his point. You glance up, half expecting another deluge, but the window is empty, its occupant already gone. As you walk, you notice the walls around you covered in graffiti, declarations of love, insults, even advertisements for gladiator matches. One scrawl catches your eye. Baths, wine, and women ruin our bodies, but they make life worth living. You chuckle, appreciating the Roman knack for finding humour in their own excesses. There's a strange charm to this city, isn't there? It's dirty, chaotic, and teetering on the edge of dysfunction, but its people carry on with a shrug and a joke, as if the mess is just part of the deal. You pass a baker's stall, the smell of fresh bread mingling with the less pleasant odours of the street, and consider buying a loaf. But you remember the gritty texture from yesterday's bread, the faint crunch of sand or dirt from the millstones, and decide to wait. Roman teeth, you muse, must be made of sterner stuff than yours. The sun is high now, and the city's pulse quickens. You're starting to see Rome for what it is, not a shining beacon of cleanliness, but a place where ambition and ingenuity wrestle with the realities of too many people in too little space. The baths, the aqueducts, the sewers, they're all marvels, but they're also flawed, patched together with the same stubborn pragmatism that keeps the empire running. You feel a strange fondness for this imperfect city, its people splashing through murky waters and laughing about it. But your stomach rumbles, reminding you it's time to eat. You turn toward the market, curious about what passes for a meal in this strange, smelly world. The baths have left you feeling, if not cleaner, at least a little wiser about the myth of Roman cleanliness. You leave the steamy chaos of the baths of Trajan behind, your tunic still clinging damply to your skin, and let your hunger guide you toward the Forum Boarium, Rome's bustling cattle market. The sun is high now, baking the cobblestones, and the air is thick with the mingled scents of livestock, spices, and the faint tang of something fermenting. The streets are alive, as always, with a press of bodies, merchants haggling, slaves hauling baskets, and a stray dog weaving through the crowd, sniffing for scraps. You're curious about what Romans eat, how they fuel this sprawling, chaotic empire. The stories paint a picture of lavish feasts, of senators reclining on couches, savouring exotic delicacies. But you're starting to suspect, after the baths, that the reality might be less glamorous. You step into the market, ready to find out. The Forumborium is a riot of colour and noise. Stalls line the square, their wooden tables groaning under piles of vegetables, leeks, cabbages, and turnips, some wilting in the heat. There are baskets of figs, their skins splitting with ripeness, and clay jars sealed with wax, labelled with scrawled promises of olive oil or wine. Fish gleam wetly in the sunlight, though their eyes are a bit too cloudy for comfort, and a butcher hacks at a slab of pork with a cleaver, shouting about its freshness. You pause at a stall where a wiry vendor, his hands slick with grease, offers you a piece of Lucanian sausage, a specialty from the south. The smell hits you first, intense, a mix of herbs, salt, and something you can't quite place, like meat left out just a shade too long. You hesitate, but his grin is infectious, and you hand over a copper coin. The first bite is a shock, spicy, salty, with a chewy texture and a faint funk that lingers on your tongue. Only the finest intestines, the vendor boasts, wiping his hands on his tunic. You're not sure if he's joking, but you smile weakly and keep chewing, hoping your stomach is as sturdy as a Roman's. You move deeper into the market, weaving past a woman selling lentils in rough sacks and a man with a cart of bread, its crusts dusted with ash from the oven. You've heard about garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans seem to worship, and you spot a stall dedicated entirely to it. Rows of amphorae, their necks sealed with cork, promise varieties from Hispania, Pompeii, even far-off Leptis Magna. The vendor, a stout woman with a scar across her cheek, dips a spoon into a jar and offers you a taste. The smell is overwhelming, like the sea left to stew in a hot alley, but you take a sip. It's salty, pungent, with a depth that's both repulsive and intriguing, like a secret you're not sure you want to know. Puts hair on your chest, the woman laughs, and you nod, unsure whether to agree or flee. You learn that garum is Rome's great equalizer, slathered on everything from porridge to pears, a staple for rich and poor alike. You buy a small jar, mostly out of curiosity, and tuck it under your arm, wondering what you'll dare to pour it on. Your stomach rumbles, so you approach another stall, this one selling what the vendor calls street food for the discerning pleb. There's a pot of simmering stew, chunks of cabbage and beans bobbing in a murky broth, and a tray of small roasted birds. Sparrows, maybe, or something smaller. You opt for a piece of bread and a bowl of the stew, handing over another coin. The bread is dense, with that familiar gritty texture you've come to expect, likely from sand or dirt ground into the flour at the mill. The stew is hearty but over-salted, and you find yourself chewing on a piece of gristle that refuses to yield. You glance at the vendor, who's already moved on to the next customer, and wonder how anyone survives this diet. The poet Martial, you recall, once griped about a meal so bad it could poison a dog, and you're starting to see his point. Still, you eat, because hunger doesn't care about standards. You find a stone bench near the edge of the market and sit, watching the crowd. A wealthy man in a fine tunic passes by, trailed by a slave carrying a basket of what looks like dormice, plump and glazed with honey, a delicacy for the elite. You've heard, stuffed with pine nuts and served at banquets. You try to imagine eating one, its tiny bones crunching between your teeth, and decide you're fine with your gritty bread. Nearby, a group of labourers huddle around a cart, sharing a jug of posca, a sour mix of vinegar and water that's cheap enough for the masses. One of them offers you a sip, and you take it, wincing at the sharp, acidic bite. "Keeps you alive," the man says with a shrug, and you nod, handing back the jug. It's not wine, but it's better than nothing, or so you tell yourself. As you eat, you notice the market's underbelly. A rat scurries past, darting between stalls, and you spot a pile of rotting vegetables in an alley, buzzing with flies. The vendors don't seem to mind, tossing their scraps wherever they land. Food safety, you realise, is a foreign concept here. The baker you passed earlier was kneading dough with hands that hadn't seen soap in days, and the butcher's table was slick with blood from yesterday's cuts. You check your bread again, half expecting to find a pebble or worse. The historian Pliny wrote about bakers whose loaves came with free ash from the oven, and you're starting to believe him. Yet there's something oddly endearing about the chaos, the way Romans embrace their imperfect meals with a kind of stubborn joy. You finish your stew, scraping the bowl clean, and stand, brushing crumbs from your tunic. You wander past a wine stall, its owner boasting about his finest Falernian, though the cloudy liquid in his jars looks more like the cheap Laura served to slaves. You decline, remembering the Bath wine from earlier and its suspicious film. Instead, you buy a handful of figs, their sweetness a welcome change from the salty stew. As you eat, you overhear two women gossiping about a recent banquet where a guest choked on a fishbone only to be saved by a quick-thinking slave. The story ends with laughter, and you smile, caught up in the market's strange energy. Rome's food, like its baths, is a mix of ambition and compromise. Grand in theory, dubious in practice. You leave the foramborium, your stomach full, but your mind buzzing with questions. How do Romans thrive on this diet of gritty bread, funky sauces, and questionable meats? Maybe it's their sheer stubbornness, the same grit that built an empire out of a swampy village. You chuckle, thinking of the graffiti you saw earlier. Garum makes everything better. There's truth in that, you suppose, or at least a kind of Roman truth, messy, bold, and unapologetic. The sun is dipping lower now, casting long shadows across the market, and you feel the pull of another Roman spectacle, the Colosseum. You've heard tales of its grandeur, of gladiators and roaring crowds, but after today, you're starting to suspect it's not all it's cracked up to be. You tuck your jar of garum under your arm and head toward the arena, ready to see what else this strange, stubborn city has in store. You leave the foramborium behind, the taste of gritty bread and pungent garum still lingering on your tongue, and let the distant roar of a crowd guide you toward the Colosseum. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting a warm glow over Rome's chaotic streets, where vendors pack up their stalls and stray dogs scavenge for scraps. You've heard stories of the Colosseum's grandeur, its towering arches, its blood-soaked arena, a monument to Rome's unyielding power. But after the baths and the market, you're starting to suspect that even this iconic wonder might hide a less glamorous truth. You weave through the crowd, dodging a cart of amphorae and a child chasing a rolling hoop, and head toward the massive structure looming ahead, ready to see it for yourself. As you approach, the Colosseum rises like a giant skeleton against the horizon, its stone arches weathered but imposing. It's breathtaking, no question, a marvel of engineering that could hold 50,000 souls, all gathered to cheer for glory or gore. You pause at the entrance, taking in the sheer scale of it. 4 stories of arches stacked high, statues perched in their niches, and the faint hum of anticipation vibrating through the stone. You join the throng shuffling inside, your sandals scuffing against the worn pavement, and feel a flicker of excitement. This is the heart of Rome's spectacle, where emperors win hearts and gladiators cheat death. But as you step into the shaded corridors, the reality starts to creep in, like a whiff of something sour on the breeze. You climb to the upper tiers, where the plebs sit, far from the cushioned seats reserved for senators and their silk-draped wives below. The stone benches are smooth from decades of spectators, their edges chipped and stained with who knows what. You find a spot, squeezing between a burly man eating a sausage, suspiciously similar to the one you tried in the market, and a woman fanning herself with a tattered palm leaf. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, cheap wine, and a faint metallic tang that you suspect is left over from yesterday's games. You glance around, noticing the litter scattered underfoot. Olive pits, broken pottery, a discarded sandal. The Colosseum, for all its majesty, feels like Rome itself, grand on the surface, but gritty up close. The games begin with a parade of gladiators, their armour glinting in the sunlight as they march into the arena below. The crowd roars, a wave of sound that makes your chest vibrate, and you lean forward, caught up in the moment. The gladiators raise their weapons, swords, tridents, nets, saluting the emperor's box, though you can't quite make out the figure seated there. The spectacle is thrilling, but your attention wanders to the arena floor. The sand, meant to soak up blood and add drama, is clumped and uneven, probably reused for weeks without a proper rake. You overhear a man nearby muttering about last month's games, when a lion refused to fight because the sand was too wet from a sudden rain. You glance at the sky, half expecting clouds, but it's clear for now. The first fight starts, a retiarius with his net and trident facing a heavily armoured Mamillo. The crowd cheers, bets are shouted, and you feel the energy of the mob pulling you in. But you can't help noticing the details. The gladiator's armour is scuffed, patched together with leather straps that look ready to snap. The sand shifts under their feet, kicking up dust that stings your eyes even from this height. You spot a vendor weaving through the stands, offering wine in chipped cups and sausages that smell like they've been sitting in the sun too long. You decline, remembering the market's dubious delights, and focus on the fight. The retiarius lands a blow, drawing blood, and the crowd erupts, but you're distracted by a child tossing pebbles at a stray dog that's wandered into the stands. The Colosseum, you realise, is less a temple of glory and more a chaotic theatre of Rome's excesses. You hear a story later from the sausage-eating man beside you about how the Colosseum's underground tunnels, the hypogeum, flood during heavy rains, sending rats scurrying into the stands, and once even stalling a bear fight when the cages wouldn't open. You glance at your feet, half expecting to see a whisker, but the floor is clear for now. The games shift to a mock naval battle, a naumachia, with the arena flooded to stage a miniature sea fight. The water is murky, probably pumped from the Tiber, and the wooden ships creak ominously as they bob. The crowd loves it, but you can't shake the thought of what's floating in that water. Sewage, maybe, or worse, given Rome's plumbing. The poet Juvenal once quipped that the Colosseum's spectacles were bread and circuses to keep the masses distracted, and you're starting to see the truth in that. The grandeur is a distraction, a shiny veneer over a grimy reality. The day's final act is a comedic one, a mock battle between dwarves dressed as mythological heroes, wielding wooden swords and exaggerated helmets. The crowd roars with laughter, and you can't help but smile at the absurdity. Here's Rome, conqueror of nations, finding its greatest joy in a farce. There's something oddly charming about it, the way the city embraces its own ridiculousness without shame. You think back to the graffiti you saw in the market. Garum makes everything better, and wonder if the same could be said for the Colosseum. It's messy, flawed, but undeniably alive, a mirror of the city itself. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the arches in shades of gold and shadow, you rise from your seat, your legs stiff from the hard stone. The crowd thins, leaving behind a trail of litter and the faint echo of cheers. You make your way down the steps, passing a vendor sweeping up spilled wine and a group of boys reenacting the gladiator fight with sticks. The Colosseum is Rome in miniature, grand, violent, and a little bit filthy, a place where glory and grime coexist in uneasy harmony. You step back into the street, your ears ringing from the noise, and feel the city's pulse slowing as night approaches. The Forum, the heart of Rome's political life, calls to you now. You've seen the empire's spectacle, it's time to see its soul. You brush the dust from your tunic and walk on, ready for the next chapter of this strange, stubborn city. You step away from the Colosseum, its roars fading into a distant hum, and let the cooling evening guide you toward the Roman Forum, the pulsing heart of the empire. The sky is turning a soft purple, streaking over the city's rooftops, and the streets grow quieter as torches flicker to life, casting shadows on the cobblestones. You've heard tales of the Forum's grandeur, where senators debate the fate of nations, where temples gleam with offerings to the gods, where Rome's laws are carved into stone. After the gritty reality of the baths, the market, and the Colosseum, you're curious to see if this place lives up to its legend. You weave through the thinning crowd, past a vendor closing his stall and a stray cat eyeing a discarded fishbone, and head toward the Forum, ready to walk where Rome's soul resides. As you enter the Forum, the scene unfolds like a dream half remembered. Marble columns rise around you, their surfaces catching the last light of day, and statues of stern-faced emperors loom over the open square. Temples to Jupiter, Saturn, and Vesta stand proud, their steps worn smooth by centuries of worshippers. It's beautiful, no question, a space that feels like the center of the world. But as you step closer, the details tell a different story. The marble is stained with soot from nearby braziers, and the ground is littered with broken pottery, olive pits, and the occasional smear of something you'd rather not identify. You pause near the rostra, the platform where orators sway crowds, and notice its base is scratched with graffiti. Gaius was here, scrawled in hasty letters. Even the gods' homes, it seems, aren't spared Rome's irreverence. You find a fallen column and sit, its cool stone a relief after a day of walking. The Forum is quieter than you expected, but not empty. A group of senators in their crisp togas stands nearby, their voices sharp as they argue over a bridge toll. Who should collect it? Who should repair the crumbling structure? Their words are grand, laced with talk of the glory of Rome, but the topic is petty, a reminder that even the empire's heart beats with bureaucracy. You overhear a merchant muttering to his friend about import duties, his tone weary, not unlike the grumbling of your neighbour back in the insula. The Forum, you realise, is just another stage for Rome's chaos, where ambition and bickering dress up in marble and rhetoric. You watch a priest in a white robe shuffle toward the temple of Vesta, carrying a small clay lamp to tend the sacred flame. The ritual is ancient, solemn, but you notice his robe is frayed at the hem, and his sandals are caked with the same dust that clings to your own. Nearby, a woman sells garlands of wilted flowers for offerings, her voice hoarse from shouting all day. You buy one, more out of habit than devotion, and lay it at the base of a statue, some forgotten consul, his nose chipped by time or vandals. The act feels hollow, like so much in Rome, grand in theory, but worn thin by reality. You think of the poet Juvenal, who called the Forum a place where truth is drowned out by noise. You're starting to understand what he meant. The air grows cooler, and you pull your tunic tighter, watching the Forum's light fade. A group of young men, probably sons of patricians, lounge near the Basilica Julia, tossing dice and laughing too loudly. One of them kicks over a clay cup, its wine staining the pavement, and you're struck by how ordinary it all feels. This is the empire's core, where laws are made and gods are honoured, but it's also just another street, littered and loud, full of people trying to get by. You spot a slave sweeping the steps of a temple, his broom kicking up dust that swirls in the torchlight. He looks tired, his shoulders slumped, and you wonder how many hours he's been at it, keeping Rome's glory polished for another day. You stand and wander toward the Curia, where the Senate meets. Its doors are closed now, but you imagine the debates inside, endless arguments over taxes, wars, and who gets to claim credit for a new aqueduct. You've heard stories of Cicero's speeches, his words shaping Rome's destiny, but you suspect the reality was messier, full of interruptions and petty grudges. You notice more graffiti on a nearby wall. Vote for Marcus, he's good for a laugh. You smile, picturing some hopeful politician, unaware his campaign slogan is a joke. The Forum, for all its pomp, is human to its core, flawed, stubborn, and a little absurd. As night settles, the Forum grows still, save for the flicker of torches and the soft crunch of your sandals on the gravel. You linger by the Arch of Titus, its relief showing victories over distant lands. But even here, the stone is cracked, the edges softened by rain and time. Rome's glory, you see now, is fading, not in a dramatic collapse but in the slow grind of daily life. The empire runs on ambition, yes, but also on the mundane, on merchants haggling, senators squabbling, and slaves sweeping up the mess. You feel a strange fondness for this place, its marble dreams built on gritty reality. It's not the shining heart you imagined, but it's alive, stubborn, and undeniably Roman. You turn back toward your insula, the city's hum now a soft lullaby. The Forum's fading light lingers in your mind, a reminder that even the greatest empires are stitched together with human flaws. You climb the creaky stairs to your room, the straw mattress waiting, and settle in, the day's dust still clinging to your skin. As you close your eyes, the Forum's shadows dance in your dreams, whispering of a Rome that's less eternal city and more eternal effort, holding itself together through sheer will. And so, you drift off, the sounds of Rome fading into the night. The eternal city, with its crumbling tenements, murky baths, gritty bread, and blood-soaked arenas, isn't the paradise you imagined. But maybe that's the point. Rome's glory wasn't in its perfection, but in its ability to keep going, flaws and all. As you sleep, you carry a piece of that stubborn spirit with you, a reminder that even the greatest empires are built on the mundane, the messy, and the human. Good night. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a peculiar crease in history's pages, one you won't find in gilded textbooks or murmured at polite suppers. Picture this. It's the early 1800s, and while most folks dream of respectable trades, baker, weaver, perhaps a farrier hammering horseshoes, some are out there, under a sliver of moonlight, clutching a shovel and chasing a career as a professional grave robber. Yes, digging up the departed was for a time a proper job. Not the sort you'd boast about at the village inn, but a living all the same. Isn't it oddly, almost absurdly human that even the dead could keep someone's hearth burning? If you enjoy these quiet, meandering tales of history's stranger corners, stories that feel like a secret whispered by lamplight, maybe like and subscribe. But only if you're in the mood. No rush. This is a bedtime story after all. So dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum, like a breeze rustling through a churchyard's yews, and let's slip into a world where the dead, in their silent way, kept a few souls fed and clothed. You ready? Let's begin. You wake up in Georgian England around 1820, in a London that thrums with life and grit. The air is heavy with coal smoke, sharp and acrid, mingling with the damp, musty scent of wool cloaks and rain-soaked streets. Your boots squelch into muddy cobblestones as you pull your collar tight against a chill that seems to seep from the city's bones. London is a study in contrasts. Gilded carriages clatter past soot-blackened tenements, their wheels splashing through puddles that shimmer with the flicker of gaslights. Street vendors hawk pies with fillings you'd rather not question, their voices weaving into the chatter of merchants, the cries of rag-pickers, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Life here is vibrant, raw, and a touch grim, like a painting with too much shadow. You pause at a corner, catching snippets of talk from passers-by, politics, cholera, the price of bread. But there's another thread, quieter, almost hushed, whispers of a trade that thrives when the city sleeps, when the only witnesses are owls perched in churchyard elms and stray dogs slinking through alleys. Grave robbing, or as its practitioners call it, resurrectionism. It's a polished name for a job that's anything but, sneaking into cemeteries, spade in hand, to coax the recently deceased from their eternal rest. Why would anyone choose this? You wonder, your breath fogging in the cool dawn air. It's not for thrills or a love of midnight rambles. It's colder, simpler, supply and demand, the oldest rule in the book. Medicine in this age is growing bold. Surgeons want to unravel the human body, its muscles, bones, and hidden workings, not just prod it with leeches and prey. But there's a snag. To study a body, you need a body. And the law isn't handing them out like market day pamphlets. The only legal cadavers come from executed criminals, and those are scarce. Maybe a dozen hanged murderers a year in London, fewer if the courts are feeling merciful. Meanwhile, medical schools are sprouting like mushrooms after a storm. Edinburgh, Glasgow, London, even smaller towns with dreams of surgical fame. Each school needs hundreds of bodies annually for students to dissect and practice. Do the math, and you'll see the gap. Demand outstrips supply by a coffin's width. So, you begin to grasp why someone might trade a warm bed for a cold graveyard. It's not glamorous, but it pays. A fresh body could fetch 5 to 20 guineas, enough to buy bread, ale, and a roof for months, in a city where rent is relentless and coal is dear. For a labourer scraping by, it's a lifeline, assuming you can stomach the smell, or the ghost stories that creep into your thoughts as the wind moans through the gravestones. You pass a churchyard gate, its iron creaking in the breeze, and wonder what it's like to cross that threshold with a shovel instead of a prayer. You decide to learn more about this shadowy trade, following a tip to a tavern called the Black Dog, tucked in a narrow alley where the cobblestones glisten with something you hope is just rainwater. Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke and the sour tang of spilled ale. The patrons keep their voices low, their eyes flicking to the door like nervous sparrows. You spot him at a corner table. Tom, a wiry man with a crooked grin and hands etched with dirt. He's no villain, just a fellow with bills to pay and a skill most would rather not claim. First rule, Tom says, leaning close, his voice a soft rasp, is you don't dig up anyone too famous. No lords, no duchesses, no one the papers will howl about. Stick to the pauper's plot. Those poor souls don't have kin to make trouble. He winks, but there's a hardness in his eyes, like someone who's seen too many moonless nights. You sip your ale, which tastes like it was brewed with regret, and listen as Tom lays out the craft with the calm precision of a tailor discussing seams. You need a dark night, no full moons to betray you. A wooden spade keeps the noise down, unlike those clanging metal ones. A sack for the body, a mate to keep watch, and a knack for moving fast. Cemeteries aren't fortresses, but churchwardens patrol now and they're not fond of their tenants being relocated. The trick, Tom explains, is digging smart. You don't haul out the whole coffin. That's too loud, too slow. Instead, you shovel down to the head end, crack the lid with a crowbar, loop a rope around the body and pull. It's grimly efficient, in and out in under an hour, provided the ground isn't frozen and the deceased isn't, well, stubbornly stiff. You wince, but Tom shrugs, his grin widening. Ever worry about ghosts? You ask, half joking. He chuckles, a low, dry sound. Ghosts don't pay my rent. Besides, the dead are quieter than my landlord. There's a twinkle in his eye, but you suspect he's checked under his bed more than once. He tells you about a night when the wind howled so fiercely he swore he heard voices, only to realise it was just a loose shutter. Still, he admits, it's hard not to imagine eyes watching from the shadows. Tom's not alone in this game. Across Britain, dozens, maybe hundreds, of resurrectionists ply their trade. Some work solo, slipping through graveyards like phantoms. Others form gangs, splitting profits and risks. They supply not just London, but Edinburgh, Dublin, even sleepy towns with medical ambitions. It's a shadow economy, with middlemen who barter with surgeons in back rooms, no questions asked, no receipts offered. You marvel at the grim entrepreneurship, a market as old as death itself. But it's not a beloved trade. The public loathes resurrectionists, call them body snatchers, sack-em-up men, or worse. They're less popular than tax collectors, which is saying something. Families guard their loved ones' graves, hiring watchmen or investing in mort safes. Iron cages bolted over coffins. You smirk at the irony. Even in death, the wealthy get better locks. Tom shakes his head at the thought, muttering about a time he nearly got caught because a mort safe was mislabeled as a pauper's plot. Cost me a night's work, he grumbles, but there's a wry amusement in his voice. You decide to see the work firsthand, though you vow to stay an observer. Tom agrees, provided you keep quiet and don't faint. It's past midnight when you meet him and his mate, Ned, a burly man with a face like weathered stone, at the edge of a cemetery on London's outskirts. The air smells of damp earth and decay, with a faint sweetness that churns your stomach. The city is as quiet as it gets, save for a distant dog's bark and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The graveyard is a patchwork of tilting headstones and sunken plots, the paupers section marked by rough wooden crosses. Tom and Ned move like they've done this 100 times. The wooden spade bites into the soft, rain-soaked soil, each scoop muffled by the night. You stand back, your lantern dimmed, watching their silhouettes against the faint city glow. They dig with purpose, not haste, their breaths steady in the cool air. You notice the little things, the way Tom pauses to wipe sweat from his brow, the soft clink of Ned's crowbar against a stone, the way the earth smells fresher as they dig deeper. It's strangely methodical, like harvesting crops, except the yield is, well, not potatoes. You try to focus on the stars peeking through the clouds, but your eyes keep drifting to the growing pile of dirt beside the grave. Soon they reach the coffin. A quick crack of the lid, a tug of the rope, and out comes the body, wrapped in a sack like a bundle of laundry. You try not to look too closely, but you catch a glimpse of pale cloth in the lantern's flicker. They're gone in under an hour, vanishing into the fog with their prize. You're left alone, the silence pressing in, wondering how anyone could make this a routine. Back at the Black Dog, Tom buys you a drink, his thanks for not bolting. He tells you about the golden age of their trade, the early 1800s, when demand for bodies was at its peak. Medical science is booming, with surgeons like John Hunter and Astley Cooper becoming near celebrities, at least among those who read medical journals. They're saving lives with new techniques, mapping the body's secrets. But their supply chain is less than savoury. Some surgeons, Tom confides, are more than customers. They're partners in all but name, tipping off resurrectionists about fresh burials or pretending not to notice when a body arrives dusted with graveyard dirt. It's a symbiotic dance, like crows picking at a carcass, mutually beneficial if grotesque. You find it ironic. Medicine, this noble pursuit, rests on a foundation of crime and necessity. Society applauds the surgeon's skill while clutching its pearls at disturbed graves. It's a contradiction wrapped in a shroud. The trade isn't all camaraderie, though. Resurrectionists compete fiercely, sabotaging each other's digs or stealing bodies from rivals. Some bribe sextons for burial schedules, others lurk at funerals to scout their next job. Tom tells you about a rival gang who once filled his dig with stones, costing him a night's work. Had half a mind to bury them, he mutters, but his grin says he admires the prank. It's a cutthroat business in the most literal sense. You smile at the thought, a turf war fought over actual turf 6 feet under. You start noticing the details that make resurrectionists so effective. It's not just about digging, it's about planning, timing, and cunning. You follow Tom to a cramped room above a butcher's shop, where the air smells of blood and sawdust. He keeps his tools here, a wooden spade, worn smooth from use, a crowbar for prying coffin lids, a sack sturdy enough for a body but light enough to carry. There's a small bottle of vinegar, which he sprinkles on his hands to mask the smell of earth and other things. You notice a pair of patched gloves, stiff with dirt, and a lantern with a shutter to control the light. Every item is chosen for silence and speed. Tom shows you a map, crude, scratched onto a scrap of paper, marking London's cemeteries. The best ones, he says, are on the city's edges, where patrols are thin and the soil is soft. He avoids big churchyards like St. Pancras, too well guarded, and sticks to forgotten plots where the poor are buried shallow. It's not personal, he says, almost apologetic. It's just business. You nod, but the weight of his words lingers, like the damp chill of the room. You learn the tricks of the trade. Some resurrectionists scatter straw over the ground to muffle footsteps. Others leave decoys, a broken shovel, a discarded sack, to throw off suspicion. Tom tells you about a gang who dressed a body in old clothes and propped it against a tree to scare off a watchman. It worked. The man fled, swearing he'd seen a ghost. You can't help but chuckle, imagining the watchman's face, pale as the moonlight. There are other ruses. Some gangs work in pairs, one digging while the other distracts patrollers with drunken singing or a staged fight. Tom once posed as a mourner, weeping loudly to cover Ned's digging. Tears are free, he says with a shrug. You admire the ingenuity, even if it's born of necessity. But there are risks. A botched job can mean arrest, though the punishment is light, fines or a few months in jail, since grave robbing isn't technically theft. The law says a body belongs to no one, a loophole that raises your eyebrow. The real danger is the mob. If a crowd catches a resurrectionist, no constable will save them from a beating, or worse. Tom shows you a scar on his arm, a memento from a close call with an angry gravedigger. Lucky it was just a shovel, he says, his voice flat but his eyes distant. You see a strange camaraderie among these men. They're outcasts, bound by their trade's secrecy. At the Black Dog they swap stories over ale, laughing about near misses or boasting about quick digs. One man, a grizzled veteran named Jack, tells of a night when he dug up the wrong grave and found a coffin full of rocks, a family's trick to fool snatchers. The table roars, but you notice Jack's hand trembles as he lifts his mug. It's a brotherhood, forged in the dark, and you find it oddly touching, like sailors sharing tales of storms survived. You decide to explore the other side of this trade, the men who need the bodies. You slip into a medical school in London's Southwark, a rambling building that smells of wax, ink, and something sharper, like pickled flesh. The lecture hall is dim, lit by candles that cast long shadows across rows of students, young men with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers. They hunch over notebooks, sketching muscles and bones as their professor, a gaunt man in a blood-specked apron, gestures at a diagram chalked on a slate. These students are the future of medicine, or so they hope. They dream of becoming surgeons, saving lives, earning respect in a world that's starting to value skill over superstition. But first, they must master dissection, a craft that requires practice, and bodies, lots of them. You watch as they file into the dissection room, a cold, tiled space where a body lies under a sheet. No one asks where it came from. They just sharpen their scalpels and begin, their faces a mix of focus and unease. You talk to a student named James, barely 20, with a nervous laugh and a habit of tugging at his collar. We don't think about, the details, he says, glancing away. We're told it's for science. That's enough. But you see the unease in his eyes, the way he flinches when the scalpel slips. He knows the body was someone's father, sister, friend. He just tries not to dwell on it. At night, he admits, he dreams of hands reaching from the earth, though he laughs it off as too much coffee. The professors are less squeamish. They haggle with resurrectionists in back alleys, paying in cash and asking no names. Some, like the famed Astley Cooper, even teach their students how to spot a good body, fresh, unblemished, ideal for study. You find it grimly practical, like a chef inspecting produce at market. Cooper once boasted he could You delve deeper into the trade's underbelly, learning how it's more than just digging and selling. There's a whole network, middlemen, tavern keepers, even undertakers, who keep the wheels turning. You meet Sarah, a tavern maid at the Black Dog who doubles as a go-between. She passes messages between resurrectionists and surgeons, her sharp eyes missing nothing. I don't touch the bodies, she says, wiping a mug, but I make sure the coin flows. Her cut is small, but it keeps her children fed. Sarah introduces you to a middleman named Mr. Cobb, a portly man with a velvet waistcoat and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He operates from a back room in a cheapside warehouse, where the air smells of tobacco and secrets. Cobb buys bodies from resurrectionists and sells them to medical schools, haggling like a fishmonger. Freshness matters, he says, inspecting a ledger. A day-old corpse is worth double one that's past its prime. You nod, trying not to picture the math. Cobb's world is one of coded language and discreet handshakes. Bodies are parcels, surgeons are clients, and graveyards are gardens. He tells you about a close call when a constable raided his warehouse, only to find crates of actual fish, his cover. Always have a backup, he says with a wink. You can't help but admire his nerve, even if his trade leaves a sour taste. You learn about the undertakers who play both sides, selling burial plots by day and tipping off resurrectionists by night. One, a wiry man named Mr. Finch, boasts he can spot a good body at a funeral, fresh, unembalmed, perfect for dissection. He meets Tom at a coffee house, slipping him a note with a burial's details. It's just business, Finch says, sipping his tea. You wonder how he sleeps, but his steady hands suggest he's made peace with it. The underworld extends to the docks, where some resurrectionists smuggle bodies to foreign schools. You hear of a gang caught with a barrel labelled pickled herring, only to reveal a corpse packed in salt. The story makes you chuckle, despite the grimness. It's a dark kind of ingenuity, and you marvel at how far the trade reaches. As the years pass, you notice the trade growing uglier. By the late 1820s, demand for bodies is insatiable. Some resurrectionists get creative. You hear whispers of Burking, a word that sends a shiver through you. It comes from William Burke and William Hare, two men in Edinburgh who took the trade to a gruesome extreme. They didn't bother with graves. Instead, they lured vulnerable souls, the homeless, the drunk, the desperate, into their lodging house, plied them with whiskey, and smothered them. 16 bodies sold to Dr. Robert Knox, no shovels required. You're horrified but not shocked. Money erodes morals like water on stone. Their trial in 1828 is a sensation, splashed across newspapers like a Gothic novel. Burke is hanged, his body, ironically, dissected for science. Hare turns informant, slipping away with his life, if not his soul. Knox escapes punishment but not scandal, his name tainted. The public is outraged, and grave robbing seems almost quaint compared to murder for profit. You find it grimly ironic. Burke and Hare weren't true resurrectionists. They skipped the digging entirely. Yet their crimes cast a shadow, making every shovel wielder look like a killer. You visit a tavern where Tom and his mates curse Burke's name, fearing the backlash. We're thieves, not murderers, Ned growls, slamming his mug. You nod, but the line feels thinner than they'd like. The scandal fuels new fears. Cemeteries become fortresses, bristling with watchtowers and armed guards. You see a poster offering a reward for body snatchers, dead or alive, and wonder how Tom keeps going. He shrugs, saying it's all he knows. But you notice his hands shake when he lights his pipe, a crack in his usual bravado. You learn that grave robbing isn't just a British quirk. Across Europe and beyond, similar trades thrive where medicine outpaces morality. In Paris, you hear of chasseurs de cadavres, cadaver hunters, who supply hospitals with bodies from unmarked graves. In America, medical schools in New York and Philadelphia rely on shadowy figures who raid potters' fields. You read about a riot in New York when a crowd found a medical school's stash of bodies, dragging them through the streets. The image is grim, but you see the same pattern. Progress demands sacrifices, and the poor pay the price. In India, colonial surgeons barter for bodies, often ignoring local customs. You hear of a British doctor in Calcutta who paid for corpses from cremation grounds, sparking outrage among locals. It's a reminder that the trade's roots are deep, tied to power and greed as much as science. You visit Edinburgh, Britain's medical capital, where the trade is fiercer than in London. The city's anatomy schools are world-renowned, attracting students from across the globe. But the supply of bodies is tighter, thanks to stricter laws and nosier locals. Resurrectionists here are bold, digging in daylight, or bribing undertakers outright. You hear of a gang caught with a cart full of bodies, disguised as a fishmonger's haul. The image makes you chuckle, despite the grimness. Back in London, you realise the trade's global reach adds complexity. Bodies aren't just local, they're a commodity, like tea or silk. Some resurrectionists dream of bigger profits, smuggling cadavers to foreign schools. You meet a docker who claims he shipped a body to Amsterdam, packed in a crate labelled medical supplies. He laughs, but his eyes are wary, as if expecting a constable's knock. It's a dark globalisation, and you marvel at its scope. By 1832, you're back in London, watching the world shift. The Burke and Hare scandal, along with other high-profile cases, has pushed Parliament to act. The Anatomy Act is passed, a law with a dull name but seismic impact. It allows medical schools to claim unclaimed bodies, those of the poor, the workhouse dead, the forgotten. Suddenly, there's a legal supply of cadavers, and the resurrectionist's trade collapses like a poorly dug grave. You feel a mix of relief and melancholy. Grave robbing was never noble, but it was practical. It filled a gap society refused to face. Now, that gap is closed, but at a cost. The poor, as always, pay the price, their bodies dissected without consent. You visit a workhouse, where the air is thick with despair, and hear whispers of fear. No one wants to end up on a surgeon's table. It's progress, you muse, but it's rarely clean. Tom, your old friend, has moved on. You find him at a dockside tavern, hauling coal instead of corpses. The work is harder, the pay worse, but he seems lighter. No more midnight shifts, he says with a grin, though I miss the quiet. You nod, wondering if he means the graveyard silence or something deeper. He tells you about his new life, sharing a cramped room with his sister and her children. It's tough but honest, and he sleeps better, or so he claims. You reflect on the trade's end. Some resurrectionists turn to other crimes, burglary, smuggling, while others faded into obscurity. A few, like Tom, found honest work, though it's a hard climb. You wonder what became of Ned, Sarah, Mr. Cobb. Their world is gone, swept away by a law that solved one problem but created others. You ponder the resurrectionist's legacy, a shadow cast across medicine's history. The Anatomy Act didn't just end grave robbing, it reshaped the field. Surgeons, freed from reliance on body snatchers, could train more students, refine their skills, and save more lives. You visit a hospital where a young surgeon, trained in the post-act era, performs a delicate operation. The patient lives, and you see the fruit of those dark years, knowledge bought with shovels and secrets. But the act deepened class divides. The poor bore the brunt of dissection, their bodies claimed without consent. You read a pamphlet by a reformer decrying the law, calling it a tax on the destitute. It's a fair point, and you wonder if the resurrectionists ever imagined their work would fuel such debates. Probably not. They were too busy digging. You visit a museum in London where a faded exhibit mentions the resurrectionists. There's a wooden spade, a mort-safe diagram, even a letter from a surgeon thanking his suppliers. It's a small nod to a trade that shaped history, but it's buried in a corner, overlooked by most. You smile, finding it fitting. The resurrectionists, even in memory, are a quiet footnote. You think about the moral tangle they left behind. Was their work wrong, or just necessary? You recall Tom's shrug, his matter-of-fact way of seeing it as a job. Maybe that's the truth. They were ordinary people in an extraordinary time, doing what they could to survive. It's a human story, flawed and messy, like the city they called home. You take one last walk through a London cemetery, years after the act. The air is softer now, the fear of body snatchers fading like a bad dream. The graves are quiet, tended by families who no longer need to stand guard. You pass a pauper's plot, its soil undisturbed, and feel a strange peace. The resurrectionists are gone, their shovels retired, their tales half forgotten. You pause by a weathered headstone, its inscription worn but legible. Rest in peace. It's a simple wish, but it feels profound after all you've seen. You think of Tom, Ned, James, Sarah, the people who lived in the trade's shadow, each navigating its moral greyness in their own way. They weren't monsters or saints, just folks caught in a strange crease of history where science and superstition clashed. You notice a groundskeeper sweeping leaves, his broom a soft rhythm against the silence. He nods as you pass, his face calm, untroubled by the ghosts of the past. You smile, grateful for the quiet, and head toward the gate. The city hums beyond, alive with new dreams and dilemmas. The resurrectionist world is gone, but its echoes linger, a reminder that progress is a path paved with hard choices. You're back in your bed now, the fan's soft hum blending with the faint patter of rain outside. The story of the resurrectionists lingers, like mist curling through a churchyard. They weren't heroes or villains, just people caught in a strange fold of history where science dared to tread on sacred ground. Their world feels distant, yet familiar, a reminder that progress often comes with a few skeletons buried in the shadows.